Hello there, my name's James Kelly and welcome back to Scot Goes Pop, and welcome also to day 2 of my bold experiment to try and turn Scot Goes Pop into some sort of audio log or whatever the correct terminology is. So obviously tonight I'll be looking at the big news of the last 24 hours, or the big news apart from Donald Trump's imminent arrival on these shores. I think the biggest news apart from that, it's fair to say, would be the sort of soft launch of the new party planned by Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana. But just before I come to that, let's take a look at the latest opinion poll, the latest GB-wide opinion poll, because there was a chap from Reform boasting about it on Twitter. He was saying this is the biggest ever lead that Reform have ever had, and that they have more support, or almost as much support actually, as the Labour Party and the Conservatives put together. And he was saying this is before we even have the launch of Corbyn's party, which apparently he thinks will take support away from the Labour Party and give Reform an even bigger lead. So in a sense, his boast was actually justified, because there is this poll from Find Out Now, which has Reform UK on 34% of the vote, Labour on 20%, the Conservatives on 16%, the Liberal Democrats on 14%, the Greens on 10%, the SNP on 3%, and Plaid Cymru on 1%. And so that 14-point lead for Reform is indeed, well, it seems to be anyway, as far as I can see, the biggest lead that Reform have had so far. Although, they have been on 34% of the vote before, and Labour have been on 20% of the vote before, but those two things have not happened at the same time before. So this is the biggest ever lead. And it's true also, as you can work out through your own mental arithmetic, that Reform's 34% is almost as big as Labour's 20% and the Conservative 16% combined. But the health warning is that this is a Find Out Now poll, and that Find Out Now have been unusually good for Reform compared to other pollsters. For example, there was a poll the other day from YouGov that had Reform only 4 points ahead. So, it's unclear who is right and who is wrong, and we can't necessarily assume that Reform really do have such a big lead. But it's true that if Find Out Now are right and everybody else is wrong, that is a pretty formidable lead for Reform. But anyway, to come back to the question of the Corbyn and Sultana party, I think this new announcement addresses at least two of the queries I had about this whole enterprise. The first query was, were Corbyn and Sultana really on the same page? Because, Corbyn put out a very carefully worded statement after Zarah Sultana announced that she was going to be co-leading the party with Corbyn to begin with. It was pretty obvious that Corbyn was not at all happy with what she said and did not accept that what she had said was fully accurate. And so, you did wonder if there was a chance that they might actually end up diverging and just doing their own thing. But that puts what happened yesterday, puts that nagging question to bed, because obviously they have reached an agreement and they now are on the same page and they're pointing in the same direction, and they will be part of this same party together, probably in leadership positions of some type or another. The other question I had was, would Jeremy Corbyn's colleagues in the Independence Alliance, or the Independent Alliance, I think it is, join the new party? Because, you could imagine that these people who did so well in the general election as independent candidates might well guard that independence very jealously, might not want to join a new party no matter how sympathetic they are with that party's policies and goals and objectives. But it does now sound from the statement that the Independent Alliance have put out that they will probably all be joining, because they've welcomed Zarah Sultana into their group, which is now 6 MPs strong. And that does seem to be a sort of provisional step towards that group becoming effectively the parliamentary party of the new party. So the party will start with at least 6 MPs, and probably more, because although there's been scepticism about whether any other Labour MPs or independent Labour MPs who have already lost the whip will join the new party, I find it hard to believe that at least 1 or 2 of them won't be tempted. They must realise, some of them, that they just have no future in the Labour Party, so what have they got to lose? So it could be that the new party will start with more than 6 MPs, in which case potentially the SNP's current status as the fourth largest party in the Commons could be threatened because they only have 9 MPs. But we shall see what happens with that. The other question, of course, was about the name of the party. And I think a lot of people assumed when they saw the announcement or the press release and it used the words "your party," they thought, oh, this is the name, which would have been a terrible name. But there was clarification that it wasn't the name of the official name of the party, but it was just like a kind of pitch to people, to say that, this is your party that you can mould, which is a relief in one way, although I think they may have missed the trick by not coming up with a final name of some sort, because that might have given the polling companies the cue they needed to actually start including the new party in voting intention polls going forward, even before a formal launch. If there's no actual name they can put on the form that people fill in online for online polls, and it might be harder for them to do that, and that might mean that the new party isn't being taken into account for the polls for several months to come, which some may be missing a trick, but probably better to have no name than to have the wrong name, and your party would have been the wrong name. It sort of called to mind when Jeremy Corbyn first became Labour leader, and he at PMQs, and he squandered the golden opportunity he had to finally be able to ask questions about all these niche subjects that he has genuine expertise on, all sorts of niche subjects related to world affairs or to poverty issues within the UK. And instead he just asked these sort of bland questions sent in by Agnes from Scunthorpe or whatever, which was not a great decision. And your party almost sounded like he was asking for the public to give him his words to speak again, which is not a way of leading a political party. But anyway, that turned out not to be the case, thankfully. But let's have a look at what the name could be, because there were some suggestions on Twitter. So the most popular suggestions were, I think, the name Rise was mentioned at one point, and please, God, no, let's not have a second Rise party. Please, no. But also, the more serious options were Left Party, Democratic Socialist Party, People's Party, and Peace and Justice Party. And People's Party is the most popular in the little informal poll that's been run. And I'm not sure that's a great idea, because and certainly in a European context, People's Party normally implies centre-right. The centre-right parties are called People's Party or Popular Party. The centre-right grouping in the European Parliament is called the European People's Party. So it's a sort of strange connotations for a radical left party to have. So I think maybe the Left Party would be a better idea, because that's in keeping with the name of the radical left party in Germany that has done relatively well over recent years. Although I can't help thinking, actually, none of these names are particularly inspiring, and that in the year 2025, you're more likely to have success if you come up with something a bit offbeat and a bit sort of left field and a bit more imaginative. So hopefully they'll come up with something better than that. The one thing about starting with MPs is that's actually quite rare for any new party. It's quite a rare opportunity for a party to not have to build themselves up from scratch with zero elected representation, but to actually have that elected representation from the start. Albeit that's no guarantee of success, of course, because Change UK started with MPs and that ended with disaster. The Alba Party started with 2 MPs and that ended in complete disaster. But I think, it is fair to say that it's an opportunity. You've got a ready-made head start if you start with MPs. And there have been times in British history where a new party that has MPs from the start has actually changed the weather pretty quickly and has changed the makeup of British politics and fundamentally changed the party system. So that could happen here. People should certainly be taking it seriously. They shouldn't just be sort of sneering at it because it's led by Jeremy Corbyn or because it's a left party rather than a centrist party. We're living in an era where the fringes do sometimes succeed. A few years ago, who would have believed that Donald Trump would ever become President of the US, on a sort of was basically a far-right policy platform. Who would ever have thought that Britain would withdraw from the European Union? So the unexpected does sometimes happen. Of course, the Labour Party itself sneered at the whole thing and put out a statement saying, the British public have already given their verdict twice on a Corbyn-led party, which is a bizarre thing to say. To actually use the word twice specifically means that they're taking into account 2017 there, where Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote, compared to the 34% that Keir Starmer got in last year's general election. So if Corbyn was rejected by the British people, then heaven only knows what the British people's verdict on Keir Starmer must be considered to be. And of course, the other thing is that to say that, it implies that the British people, it implies that the Starmer wing of the Labour Party think that the British people made the right decision in 2017 and 2019 to elect the Conservative Party to government. And that sort of just reinforces the suspicion that the Starmer wing were always the enemy within, that they were always sabotaging the party leadership from within. Any loyal Labour Party member is supposed to believe that even the worst Labour leader is still far better than any sort of Tory government at all. And what about the suggestion that independent supporters in Scotland should maybe throw in their lot with this Corbyn Sultana party as an alternative means of getting to independence? Because apparently there's no suggestion that this party will sort of turn its face completely against the idea of independence. It might be neutral, for example. And Craig Murray was suggesting that it might be possible for left-wing, pro-independence left-wingers to just flood the new party and just seize it with a vice-like grip and make absolutely sure it actually becomes positively pro-independence. And I suppose if people have those skills to organise and to persuade and if they know what they're doing to try and undertake that sort of operation to seize control of a new party, then it may be a worthwhile endeavour. But for the vast majority of people who don't have those sort of skills and who'll be just sort of waiting to see what emerges, I find it hard to believe actually that what will emerge will be pro-independence. That probably at best it will be neutral. At worst it could even be hostile again, like all other London-based parties. So I think always, absolutely always, it's going to make sense to vote for a pro-independence party if you believe in independence. That doesn't mean, of course, that we won't be sort of hoping that people south of the border vote for this party, because then that would give an SNP government the opportunity to, a partner to negotiate with that might actually be able to deliver an independence referendum. And again, I know it probably sounds fanciful that a left-wing party could actually be elected to government, but if there's a hung parliament, then all sorts of possibilities come into play, and it might be a sort of complex coalition that might have some role for the Corbyn party, and they might have some sort of influence on questions about independence, other questions relating to the constitution. And they may be in alliance with the Green Party, of course, and that would maybe pull them more towards a sort of independent sympathetic direction, because the England and Wales Green Party, they're always conscious of the fact that their sister party in Scotland is pro-independence, and I don't think they would ever go against that in any way. So, some sort of alliance between the Green Party and the new Corbyn party could be interesting for Scottish independence, because, that any such alliance, any sort of firm electoral pact is certainly not going to poll lower than the Greens are currently doing. The Greens are at a high level, and certainly the hypothetical polls we've seen, which albeit with all their shortcomings, they do suggest that the Corbyn party can reach current Labour voters that the Greens cannot reach, and so there'll be presumably any sort of electoral pact would be able to bring more support across and would be more popular than the Greens currently are. So it's not totally fanciful to imagine them on, say, 15-20% of the vote, and that's not going to be far off the lead the way the vote is split at the moment. The vote is split 5, 6, 7 ways. You can practically get close to the lead on 20% of the vote. So it's genuinely possible that this new party could be a major player, but we'll just have to wait and see. In a few weeks' time, it may seem obvious that it was never going to go anywhere, but my suspicion is that this could be a significant moment in British politics, and indeed in Scottish politics, in terms of the prospects for independence. Lastly, just to change the subject before I go, I must just mention this horrific statement that Keir Starmer has put out, which, you know, is supposed to represent progress for him speaking out about the situation in Gaza, but he's described this humanitarian catastrophe without actually mentioning the perpetrator of the catastrophe, whereas he does mention Hamas and say that Hamas must unconditionally release the hostages. It's just absurd that he can't even bring himself in that statement to say that Israel are required to do anything at all, let alone to end the genocide which they are solely responsible for. And he finishes by saying that a ceasefire will put us on the path to the recognition of a Palestinian state. So he's making a ceasefire a precondition for a Palestinian state. And yet everybody knows that Netanyahu doesn't want a Palestinian state. And so he can make sure that prerequisite is never met, and therefore the genocide will continue. It is an absurd, deeply offensive statement by Starmer. So on that rather depressing note, I will leave you for tonight, and well, thanks for listening. And if you've enjoyed this audio file, I'd be very grateful if you would hit the subscribe button if you're listening on YouTube, and also if you could like the video, that would be great too. So many thanks for listening, and I'll see you